Okay, it looks like we pretty much got everyone. Ani Bojo. My name is Willie, and I'd first like to welcome you all to the Integrating Indigenous Wisdom into Daily Practice workshop, and to our Moose Hide Campaign Day to raise awareness and take action to stop the violence against Indigenous women and children. I'm going to be working kind of as the workshop moderator for today, and I'm super excited to be here and to see so many people taking part in this truly inspiring workshop today. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge that I am living, working, playing, and learning every day on unceded Statlian lands, specifically the Kwagiulth First Nation, where I'm super honored to be part of the community and to take in the beautiful mountain views and learning from the Kwagiulth people every day. As we are all participating from different areas across Turtle Island, I ask that you take some time to learn which traditional territory you're residing on, and include that knowledge and that learning in your space today as we ground ourselves in ceremony. I have a few housekeeping matters to go over before we begin our workshop. Firstly, I'd like to let everyone know that we will have a question and answer period, and if you have any questions, you're free to put them into the chat, and please direct them to myself. So in the chat, you'll see that you can direct them to different people. Please direct them to me, Willie, and I'll collect them and ask them during our Q&A. Our chat will only be viewable to our facilitation team today so that we can keep this space safer for our participants. If you have any questions for me or technical difficulties, you can also reach out to me by email. And I will try and respond as soon as possible. And my email is wpoll@moosehidecampaign.ca. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I'd now like to welcome Leslie McGarry, our workshop facilitator today. Leslie is part of a strong ancestral line of knowledge keepers and continues to work hard in the field of cultural awareness. She is truly an inspiring and remarkable person, and I really hope you all enjoy spending some time with her today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Leslie, and without further ado, I will hand over the virtual mic.
Okay. Okay. Kakela Nukwa Leslie. Gayuklan la Akis. Kwagiulth Kwagiulth. Gelakesla means welcome. Nukwa means my name is, and my name is Leslie. Kwagiulth means I am from, and Tsakis is the name of the village I come from the northeastern part of Vancouver Island. So I'm from the Kwagiulth territory, from a Kwagiulth village. That makes me a visitor to these lands. And where I am situated right now, I am in the territory of the Lekwungen people, who we know of today as Esquimalt and Songhees. And I want to acknowledge them by saying Hitchka, and I thank them for the privilege of learning, growing, raising my family in their community, and they have always been very kind to me, very gracious hosts. So I'd like to thank them whenever I can. I would like to acknowledge the people responsible for creating, hosting, and facilitating the Moose Hide campaign, and for the invitation to participate. I believe it is critical to the healing and restoration of Canada's Indigenous people to come together and share our truths. And while I would prefer to be presenting in person, I understand the need to apply the technology we are using today. So, thank you. On that note, if we were able to gather in person, I would offer you food before sharing information. My grandmother would always offer her visitors food before settling down for a visit. The word for hungry in my language is puska. And she would invite people to have something to eat before inviting them for a conversation. It was her belief that if you feed people, they are not preoccupied with a growling tummy. Today, I'm going to have to assume that you are all looking after yourselves by starting the day with a healthy breakfast. So before we begin, I wanted to share a bit of my background. I would like to clarify that I did not acquire my knowledge through the generally accepted academic methods. After graduating from high school, I attended the University of Victoria, and for 2 years, I felt myself adrift in a culture I had no connection to. I felt like I was struggling with the concept of being lectured to versus spoken with, which is something I was used to from my family. I felt like I was being forced to ignore my instincts, and was especially disheartened when my anthropology instructor ignored my attempts to correct terms of reference when speaking about the people from my territory. So, realizing that this was not a good fit for me, I left the University of Victoria to pursue a form of education to be directly related to what I wanted to do. I chose to take full advantage of the opportunities to work directly with traditional knowledge and wisdom keepers from both within and outside my own territory. Through their guidance and support, I was able to apply the teachings of my ancestors and understand and appreciate that knowledge is relational, shared, and so cannot be owned. Having 4 generations of my family represented within the First Peoples Gallery of the Royal British Columbia Museum has played a substantial role in my professional journey. I would like to clarify that the intention of the information I'm about to share is not to boast, but to explain how my family inspired me to step up and begin to shift perceptions from the long ago to the alive and vibrant present. Mary Ebbets Hunt, or Anislaga, was my great-great-great-grandmother, and 2 of her cultural items are presented in the gallery. A beautifully beaded hat showcased in the Our Living Languages exhibit, and a beautiful Chilkat dance apron featured in the weaving exhibit. Mary's son, George Hunt, worked with the photographer Edward Curtis and anthropologist Franz Boas to record the cultural practices and histories of the Kwakiutl people. My great-grandfather, Chief Jonathan Hunt, is represented in the gallery by the replica of his cedar plank house situated in the center of the First Peoples Gallery. My grandfather, Chief Henry Hunt, served as master carver for the museum for 20 years, working in the carving shed of Thunderbird Park. He carved monumental totem poles, including the one that currently stands in the 1967 Montreal Expo site. With his father's permission and with assistance from his sons, the late Chief Tony Hunt and Richard Hunt, they built the replica of the house. And it's not built to scale. It's actually quite a bit smaller than the original, and it has acquired a nickname. We call this house Gilksipidu, which means little big house. My grandmother, Helen Hunt, who was raised by Chief Mungo Martin, worked as a docent and interpreter for the museum. She also accompanied Chief Martin to England for the raising of the centennial pole in Windsor Great Park in 1958. She also served as an ambassador of the Kwakiutl people alongside her husband, Chief Henry Hunt, for the royal visit to Victoria in May of 1971. Upon the retirement of my grandfather from Thunderbird Park, my uncle Richard Hunt served as master carver for 13 years and then moved on to pursue his own career as a Kwagiulth artist. Richard Hunt is a member of the Order of Canada and the Order of British Columbia. My mother, Shirley Hunt Ford, is an artist in her own right through the crafting of the button blankets that are a post-contact addition to our ceremonies. Many of her works are showcased in museums and private collections around the world. My contribution towards carrying this legacy forward began in earnest while I was employed with the Victoria Native Friendship Centre. Over the span of 26 years, I learned how to conduct my research through Indigenous methodology, including adherence to cultural protocols and the application of cultural values. This learning process constitutes my definition of Indigenous ways of knowing and being. I also believe that I represent a handful of children from my generation to be raised in an environment of acceptance from both sides of my family. I was never treated like I was half of this and half of that, or somehow less important because of my mixed heritage. Instead, I grew up with the confidence that I was a complementary blend of 2 cultures, which resulted in my aspiration to serve as a bridge between cultures. My intention is to offer an Indigenous approach and or perspective that will encourage the breakdown of the all too frequent stereotyping of Indigenous people. It is my hope that through sharing an alternative worldview, we might begin to navigate a journey towards reconciliation. I also believe it is particularly important for future generations that we come together to recognize and celebrate the best in all cultures. A big part of my life has also been that I've been married for 36 years. And together, my husband and I have raised three wonderful young men. And we are now grandparents to six beautiful grandchildren who all call me Ada. Okay. On that note, if we were all together, I would ask you to turn and introduce yourself to the person on your immediate left and then your immediate right. And I would like you to take a moment to think about what you would say. So just consider sharing what you would normally share if you were at a workshop or at a meeting, something like that. Okay. Most people, whether attending a meeting, conference, or workshop, have a tendency to introduce themselves according to their profession. I've been a nurse for the next number of years, or I work in this field and have been doing that for a number of years. The next thing I would like to ask of you would be to turn, if we were together, would be to turn and share something about yourself with the people to your immediate left and immediate right. Are you a grandparent? Are you going to be celebrating a milestone like graduation or attending a son or daughter's wedding? So think about what you would share if you were going to share a little bit about yourself, other than your profession and how long you've been doing it. I usually allow a little more time for that one because people really have to flip through what they would be comfortable sharing. But quite often when we share a little bit about ourselves, we identify common ground, which can sometimes open a door to deeper appreciation of those around us. Neighbors, coworkers, teachers, bus drivers. What we do for a living is not who we are. We are so much more. And when we share that, there's that potential to spark interest in learning a little bit more about each other. An example I would like to share is I was attending a workshop and we were doing that exact thing, introducing ourselves. And I noticed a theme that was created from the first presenter. And it was, I've lived in Victoria for, 3 months. I've moved here from Alberta. And somebody else would say, oh, my family's lived here for 5 years. And somebody else shared, my family has lived here. We were settlers. We trace our ancestry back to 2 or 3 generations. And when it came to be my turn, I said, my family has lived here for 10,000 years. And eyebrows were raised, and then I had to explain what I meant by that. And it kind of broke the ice with people, and we were able to relax and proceed with the rest of the workshop. But it's amazing how sharing just personal interests and everything can build some of those bridges. Just wanted to reiterate the purpose of this workshop. We are here today to discover the benefits of integrating Indigenous wisdom into our daily practice. This gathering will hopefully offer insights into how integration of traditional values, teachings, practices, and protocols effectively serve Indigenous peoples as they stand up against violence towards women and children. I encourage you to consider the presentation with open minds and open hearts, and perhaps leave behind preconceived ideas about Indigenous peoples. Once again, if we were able to come together in the same space, I would have arranged the seating to represent an open circle in order to promote an open learning environment. I come from a culture of a rectangle. That's our big house, the way we are situated in the house. And with the arrangement of an open semicircle, we would not compromise the traditional protocols that are associated with the circle from perhaps the Eastern cultures. Culture of communication that is used by the people. There is a lot of very respectful protocols that are associated with that form of sharing, and I would never want to compromise those protocols. Indigenous ways of being and knowing cannot be fully appreciated, in my opinion, with handouts and or PowerPoints. I prefer instead to encourage further investigation by inspiring sincere interest. We acquire our knowledge through the discipline of listening and experiencing through the engagement of both mind and heart. Again, I refer to my grandmother. She used to say, always make sure, and she would point to her head and her heart, and she would say, always make sure to use this and this, pointed to her heart, before you use this. And then to add in, she would point to her feet and say, so those don't end up in here. And it was always being aware that what you say, people always remember what you say, and to say it in a very respectful way. You have to think about it first and make sure you engage your heart and your mind at the same time. To support this approach, I will share personal stories, as I've already done, and family histories to encourage a meaningful educational experience, reminiscent of the traditional teaching methods of our ancestors. I encourage each of you to attend the session with an open mind and open heart, while considering the notion that memory is enhanced when there is emotion attached. I'm just going to run through some terms of reference. In order to encourage an understanding of the application of Indigenous wisdom, values, and practices, I offer the following terms of reference. Wisdom keepers. The definition of a wisdom keeper is simple yet complex. It is the path of ultimate accountability and integrity. Even though there are sacred tools and techniques that are passed down from generation to generation, the path of a wisdom keeper is more of a way of life and or calling. Wisdom keepers are usually identified by their respective communities as being gifted with specific knowledge surrounding cultural practices, ceremonies, and protocols. Wisdom keepers also consider how to share, with whom, when, how much, why, and where. Example of a role of a wisdom keeper would be when we go into the forest, and I'm speaking on behalf of my people, when we go into the forest to identify a cedar tree for a totem pole, canoe, or housepost, etc., we have to consider the length of time that tree has stood as a witness to the history of the land. In British Columbia, we have trees that have stood for well over 500 years. A wisdom keeper would be in attendance to identify the right tree, offer prayers to the tree for giving up its life for this purpose, and provide a ceremony of gratitude after the tree is cut down. In my territory, what they would often do would be to take eagle down, which to our people represents peace and tranquility. And there'd be a scattering of that eagle down around the base of where the tree once stood. This is the standard definition of values according to the Canadian Oxford Dictionary. The principles or moral standards of a person or social group, the generally accepted or personally held judgment of what is important in life. Indigenous values, this is the definition for Indigenous values. Although there is no single Indigenous culture, there are common threads in the traditions of Indigenous people that are worth remembering and integrating into our daily lives. They can assist with addressing the fundamental social and ecological issues of our times, and they can directly inform our guiding principles. These are examples of Indigenous values. The 7th generation principle. This principle states that we should make decisions about how we live today based on how our decisions will impact the future 7 generations. We must Be good caretakers of the earth, not simply for ourselves, but for those who will inherit the earth and the results of our decisions. Everything belongs to those not yet born. Walking softly on the earth, long before contemporary terms like carbon footprint, green economy, and sustainability were in common usage, Indigenous people believed in living in respectful balance with all life. We must understand our relationship to all life and try our best to live in balanced relationship to life. We did not create the web of life, we are one strand within it. Respect, humility, and tolerance. Although respect and humility and tolerance are not uniquely Indigenous values, they are essential and extremely useful when considering how to enhance our daily lives. In the fundamental laws or principles of most Indigenous societies, respect is integral to healthy and balanced relationships. Without self-respect or respect for others, we doom ourselves to imbalance, mistrust, and resentment. With respect, we appreciate the interconnection of all life and are an indispensable part in the circle of life. With humility and tolerance, we appreciate that we are all in a constant quest for great understanding, wisdom, contentment with ourselves and with life around us. Always seek the courage to be a better person. Indigenous teachings. Teachings remind us to think about the whole circle of life. They remind us that the health of each person, family, community, and nation is a result of balanced and harmony of spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical aspects. This creates well-being. Elders teach that relationships, environment, living conditions, and history affect emotional health. So there's always this example of connection. First Nations people don't believe that everything around us is there for the taking. There's a sense of coexistence. And we'll talk about that later, about the protocols around things like hunting, gathering. Some of the examples of these teachings, this one is the 7 sacred teachings. 7 sacred teachings, each represented by an animal, are important laws in several Indigenous cultures. They honor spirituality and connection and connect us to the land. Each animal offers a special understanding of how we should live in harmony with the Creator, ourselves, with one another, and with Mother Earth. I'll run through the titles of each one and then explain a little bit more about each one. So love, truth, courage, honesty, humility, wisdom, and respect. Love, represented by the eagle, always act in love, love the Creator and Mother Earth, love yourself, your family, your community, and Mother Earth's creatures. Truth, represented by the turtle, always pursue truth. Living in truth means existing in the 7 teachings. Courage, represented by the bear, listen to your heart. It takes courage to do what is correct. Honesty, this is represented by the Sasquatch. Be honest with yourself and others. Speak from your heart. Be true to your word. Humility, represented by the wolf. Think of others first and exhibit humbleness to the Creator by being thankful. Wisdom, represented by the beaver. Everyone has special gifts. Embody wisdom by using your gifts for goodness and harmony. And the last one, respect, represented by the buffalo. Respect life on earth, honor children, youth, women, men, elders of all races through kindness and charity. The other example I would like to use is the traditional code of ethics. This was created at a gathering of elders in Alberta as the young people came forward and said, we need some guidelines. We need something that we can aspire to, that we can work towards, that will encourage us to move forward in a good way. So the first one, give thanks to the Creator each morning upon rising and each evening before sleeping. Number 2, seek the courage to be a better person. Number 3, showing respect is a basic law of life. Respect the wisdom of people in council. Once you give an idea, it no longer belongs to you, it belongs to everyone. Be truthful at all times. Always treat your guests with honor and consideration. Give your best food and comforts to your guests. The hurt of one is the hurt of all. The honor of one is the honor of all. Receive strangers and outsiders kindly. All races are children of the Creator and must be respected. To serve others, to be of use to family, community, or nation is one of the main purposes for which people were created. True happiness comes to those who dedicate their lives to the service of others. Listen to and follow the guidance given to your heart. Expect guidance to come in many forms, in prayer, in dreams, in solitude, and in the words and actions of elders and friends. Sometimes, even though we don't come from a written culture, having those things around us in written form, some people have painted it, embroidered it, something that's going to be a big part of their household, and always remind them to move forward in a good way. Practices and protocols. Practices are the application of the values and teachings. Examples include brushing or smudging. Both are forms of spiritual cleansing. So in my territory, if you have negative energy, you want it removed, you will have somebody take a cedar bough and literally brush you, dust you off. Then you might take the cedar boughs and toss them in the fire or toss them in the ocean. That's gets rid of bad feelings. You might also be encouraged to carry a small packet of eagle down. This brings tranquility back to your whole body. In other cultures, they do what's called smudging. It's my understanding that sage is a masculine smudge and gets rid of negative energy, where sweetgrass is a feminine smudge and welcomes in good energy. It's also important to know that energy is not just embodied in yourself. It can be almost hovering in a room. So if you are perhaps working in the field of social work and you have a really difficult disclosure that's shared with you, the room that you're working in is now holds that energy. And to clear the room of that energy, you might open the windows and doors and dust the room with cedar boughs, depending on what sort of cultural practice resonates with you. Or you might burn sage to get rid of the bad feelings and then burn the sweetgrass to welcome in the good feelings. It's important to know that if we don't do these cleansings, we carry that with us, which leads to stress, which leads to illness often. It's really important to not just look after your physical self, but also your spiritual self. And when you carry that heaviness with you, it does impact your wellness. So we always want to make sure that we not only cleanse ourselves, but we cleanse the space. We don't want other people walking into that negative energy. Protocols are intended to provide effective and respectful manners of communication. An example would be when you acknowledge your position as a visitor to a territory that is outside your own. You always want to demonstrate those protocols. The cultures of Indigenous peoples are the roots for the philosophy, values, and customs that are reflected in their worldviews. And that's the next thing we're going to cover: Indigenous peoples' worldviews versus Western worldviews, because this has been a huge part of the barrier to communication, is these completely different worldviews. And we will run through the what is a definition of a worldview. Overall, a worldview is a set of beliefs and values that are honored and upheld by a number of people. A worldview includes how the person or group interacts with the world around them, including land, animals, and people. Every person in society, they all have a different worldview. Many societies pass on their worldview to their children to ensure continuity. And as people interact and learn from one another, it is not uncommon for them to acquire the beliefs of other worldviews. And worldviews evolve as people and societies evolve. Understanding the core differences between Indigenous worldviews and Western worldviews is an important component in achieving cultural harmony and respectful relationships. The following examples speak in very general terms in the description of these differences. The root of the difference between the worldviews is that they generally subscribe to opposite approaches to knowledge, connectedness, and science. Indigenous cultures focus on a holistic understanding of the whole that emerged from the millennium of their existence and experiences. Traditional Western worldviews tend to be more concerned with science and concentrate on compartmentalizing knowledge and then focus on understanding the bigger related picture. So I'm going to run through 8 differences between Indigenous and Western worldviews. The first one This is the Indigenous, I will present the Indigenous worldview first and then the Western worldview. For the first one, spirituality-oriented society, system based on belief and spiritual world. For Western society, scientific, skeptical, requiring proof as a basis of belief. The next one, there are many truths. Truths are dependent upon individual experiences. In Western society, there is only one truth based on science or Western-style law. The third one, society operates in a state of relatedness. Everything and everyone are related. There is a real belief that people, objects, and the environment are all connected. Law, kinship, and spirituality reinforce this connectedness. Identity comes with this connection. Western society is more compartmentalized society, thinking in silos. If we look at that one and we think about our education system, there is social studies, science, language arts. If you did that in a First Nations community, they are all like interlocking circles rather than silos of information. Number 4, the land is sacred and usually given by a creator or supreme being. In Western society, the land and its resources should be available for development and extraction for the benefit of humans. Number 5, time is non-linear, cyclical in nature. Time is measured in cyclical elements. The seasons are center to this cyclical concept. In Western culture, time is usually linearly structured and future-oriented. The frame of month, years, days, etc. reinforces this linear structure. Number 6, feeling comfortable is measured by the quality of your relationship with people. In Western society, feeling comfortable is related to how successful you feel you have been in achieving your goals. Number 7, human beings are not the most important people in the world. In Western culture, human beings are the most important people in the world. And number 8, amassing wealth is important for the good of the community. In Western society, amassing wealth is for personal gain. Understanding and respecting the differences in worldviews will help in relationship building between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We must learn to live together or perish together as fools." Okay. Once again, if we were together, this would be an exercise that we would do together. I would divide you into groups to participate in this next exercise. What I'm going to do instead is share 5 scenarios with you. And I would like you to think about what you think is happening in each situation and consider the definitions and worldviews that have been presented. Okay, so the first one is you are heading home after a long weekday at work. You are coming up to an intersection with a merge lane to your right when a woman cuts you off and you were forced to pull to the left, which interferes with another driver. You honk your horn, but the woman drives off, seemingly unaware of what she has done. I want you to think about what's going on there, because there's usually something underlying that's going on. Okay. Okay, the next one is incorrect change. You are hosting a dinner at your home and realize that you have missed a couple of ingredients for the meal. You quickly head out to pick up a few things at your local grocery store, hoping you can get back in time. The cashier serving you is a pierced, tattooed, and seemingly disinterested young man who can't make change correctly. Think about what's going on there. Okay, the next one is you are meeting friends for lunch at a favorite restaurant, And once again, you are having to navigate past the same scary looking bum who is always begging for money in the same spot every day. You wonder in passing why he doesn't get a job as you hurry past. Okay, the next one. You were shopping for a birthday card and a gift at your local pharmacy. You really want to make it to the celebration on time, but an elderly couple is walking annoyingly slow through the store aisles and blocking your shopping progress. Okay, and the last one here. You were heading into work on public transit when a young man boards the bus at the next stop. The man is wearing a leather jacket with a hand-drawn skull across and crossbones image on the back. The legs of his jeans are torn on both knees and the ragged edges are slumped over black, worn-out biker boots. He is wearing a black bandana over his shoulder-length hair and his hands are covered in tattoos. The driver informs him that he cannot bring his can of Coke onto the bus, and a heated discussion ensues. The man seems disoriented and then collapses in front of the driver. Okay, so the point of this exercise is to refrain from judgment. We tend to go to a place where we feel we are somehow being deliberately inconvenienced. We honk our horns, roll our eyes, ignore people, or huff and puff as we push past. We don't consider possible circumstances. We move almost instantaneously to judgment. The first four scenarios I gave you, they come from a poem I'm going to read to you. And it's not really a poem, it's more like a writing, and it's called A Different Type of Prayer. So, Creator, help us remember that the jerk who cut us off in traffic last night is a single mother who worked 9 hours that day and was rushing home to cook dinner, help with homework, do the laundry, and spend a few precious moments with her children. Help us remember that the pierced, tattooed, disinterested young man who can't make change correctly is a worried 19-year-old college student balancing his apprehension over final exams with his fear of not getting his student loans for next semester. Remind us that the scary-looking bum begging for money in the same spot every day, who really ought to get a job, is a slave to addictions that we can only imagine in our worst nightmares. Help us remember that the old couple walking annoyingly slow through the store aisles and blocking our shopping progress are savoring this moment, knowing that, based on the biopsy report she got last week, this will be the last year that they go shopping together. Creator, remind us each day that of all the gifts you give us, the greatest gift is love. It is not enough to share that love with those we hold dear. Open our hearts, not just to those who are close to us, but to all humanity. Let us be slow to judgment and quick to forgiveness and patience and empathy and love. All my relations. The last one I gave you regarding the bus passenger actually happened with my husband. My husband was a driver for BC Transit for a number of years, and he did have this young man come on board. And everybody thought that he was high. Something's wrong with this guy. I mean, everybody was thinking about the way he was dressed and the way he looked, and he was obviously on drugs. What happened was the young man was diabetic. So my husband phoned an ambulance right away, thinking that there's something wrong, not real, and he was making the same judgment that he's high and I got to get him off the bus, but I can't just under the circumstances, just, kick him off. So he called an ambulance and right away noticed that the ambulance attendant hung an IV and knew that the man was diabetic. So when we think about the Highway of Tears and the missing and murdered Indigenous women, we know from the media that initially many were judged according to the way they were dressed, their decision to walk alone, or how drunk or high they were. It wasn't until people began to actively step up and challenge these judgments that we began to consider that maybe the mode of dress was a popular choice of the time, or maybe they were running away from someone, or maybe they were possibly forced or intentionally drugged by someone. We went immediately to judgment because they're First Nations women. They asked for this. There's all of these stereotypes that are attached to them. And that's why it's important that when we are moving forward, that we take a couple of minutes to think about what's really going on for that individual. We were heading to an event, my husband and I, and there was somebody going very slow in front of us. And I immediately went to, maybe there's a child in the back seat that's upset, or maybe they're transporting a wedding cake for somebody and they're afraid it's going to topple over. There's 100 different reasons why they're doing this. And it certainly isn't to deliberately annoy you. So that's why we have to move away from judgment. We're going to move into language and culture. Language and culture are key components to understanding Indigenous wisdom and traditional values. It is important to briefly consider pre-contact history to understand the founding elements that serve to develop the ethical ideals of Indigenous peoples. British Columbia is home to the largest number of diverse languages and cultures than anywhere else in Canada, and that is attributed to the fact that we are also the most mountainous region, which supported the establishment of natural pockets of people living in specific regions of the province. Within the different 203 territories, there are 34 languages and 61 dialects. The languages come from the land and are very complex, and in my opinion, also very poetic. For example, if you were to look up the word children in a dictionary, it would say human beings from 0 to mid-teens. If you were to look in my dictionary, which is Kwagiulth, the word you're looking up is Kinkananam. Kinkananam means sacred and precious little people. And I think that is a beautiful way of describing our children. Within the many languages, there are 2 words that do not exist. I think this is really important just to break down again some preconceived ideas. The first word is art. What most people refer to as artwork is considered by First Peoples to be cultural property. The images displayed on bentwood boxes, dance screens, and house fronts indicate ownership and/or connections to creation stories. The other word that does not exist is volunteer. It is an unspoken expectation that in your lifetime you will share your particular skills and/or gifts or knowledge with your people. This concept is taught from a very young age. We are encouraged to make our way in the world by filling and sharing our baskets. Nobody's going to remember the car you drove or the house you lived in. They are going to remember how and what you gave back to your community. So I'm going to run through some pre-contact history, differences, and then common ground between different First Nations. And one of the biggest ones in British Columbia is the difference in leadership between coastal and interior First Nations. Prior to contact with European cultures, there were 2 distinctive forms of governments in British Columbia. Leadership from the interior territories. This position of headman was determined through appointment or selection, with the defining skill set being the best hunter, gatherer, provider for the people. This person would be able to, would know where to hunt and when. They would know where to establish a permanent village site and would be well-versed in cultural protocols. Leadership from the coastal territories. This position of chief, or Kinkme, was determined through hereditary right. This person would also be aware of the importance to provide for the people, would be well-versed in cultural protocols, and would have performed specific rites of passage to indicate their suitability for the position. One of the things I've learned through speaking with elders is how young men who were potentially going to be leaders were challenged to be able to sneak up on a sea lion and steal a few whiskers. If they could do that, they were courageous and able to potentially take on an important position of leadership. While these two forms of leadership took place in two very diverse environments, they had two very important things in common. The first one, both leaders based their decisions on the most important people in their respective villages, children. Children are the most important. Everything belongs to those not yet born. So they have both had a sense of responsibility to ensure that there was always food, clothing, and housing for future generations. Both leaders did not have to make their decisions independently. Both had the benefit of two councils, Council of Elders and Council of Women. Women were a key component of leadership. In some instances, women were the chief makers. For example, you might be the eldest son in a family, and attempts have been made to prepare you for your inherited position. However, you have not demonstrated commitment towards cultural knowledge and protocols, but your younger brother has. The women will choose the younger brother because they have to think about the benefit to the community and not that specific individual or family. Women were also the justice keepers. If you repeatedly demonstrated aggressive behavior that threatened the safety of others, you faced the life givers and they decided what would happen to you. An individual was often given several chances to adjust their behavior before being banned from the village. So they might talk to you and address the fact that your behavior was threatening to other people. So you'd have time to maybe consider choosing a different path. They might have the elders speak with you. They might actually isolate you in the forest to think about your behavior and look inside yourself for some answers to adjust your behavior. But if you continued to exhibit the same aggressive behavior, you were banned from the village. Most people did not survive their first winter without the benefit of their community. So this was a very drastic measure. And women often had children witness this justice that would take place. And it took place right now, right here and now, not months or weeks down the road, right there, right now. So children growing up witnessing this knew there were consequences for aggressive behavior. And as a direct result of that, there was very little crime amongst the First Nations people. Locally here with our First Nations territory, if you did something very aggressive, especially to a child, not only were you banned, you were branded. They would literally take a stick from the fire and mark your face. That way, none of the coastal nations would take you in because they knew you were not to be trusted. So it was very important to encourage that sense of living and working together rather than somebody who was taking maybe what didn't belong to them or threatening other people. So this is the way leadership was happening for First Nations people, whether they were from the interior of British Columbia or the coast. Now we come into post-contact history and the impact to leadership and governance. Since the Truth and Reconciliation and calls to action were revealed, Canadians have heard the horrific stories surrounding the impact of colonization. Here's a snippet of history from British Columbia. In 1778, alcohol was introduced to the people of Haida Gwaii. What they don't tell you in the textbooks is that the grade of alcohol was 150 proof. The people thought it was a powerful medicine and gave it to children and the elderly, and many died instantly because it was like drinking poison. If you wanted to proof alcohol back in the day, you took an equal measure of gunpowder and alcohol, and you poured the alcohol onto the gunpowder, and as long as it could still ignite, that's how you proofed alcohol. This was to ensure that you weren't being sold a barrel that was half full of water and half full of rum. So we knew that ships were sailing out of England with this grade of alcohol at this time in 1778. In 1862, a smallpox epidemic ravages the province, and within a very short period of time, a third of the population of First Nations people are lost. Whole villages are abandoned because there aren't enough living to bury the dead, and people move away from their traditional territories into the only other place there's human contact, which are the settlement areas. In 1884, cultural ceremonies are banned along with traditional roles of leadership. Women lose their prominent positions as counselors due to the imposed European concept that women are not intelligent and only good for having children, keeping house and were not considered to be people or persons in their own right until 1922. So when you got married in Europe, it was basically man and cow, man and dog, man and wife. And you could actually sell your wife for as little as a pint of beer. This actually happened in 1863. A man sold his wife to get a pint of beer. In 1863, the first residential school opens in British Columbia. Thousands of children would be physically, sexually, and mentally abused until the last one closed in 1985. That was Christie Residential School. 7 generations went through the schools. How many generations will experience the fallout? At that residential school, 44 little boys were removed from their villages and sent to the schools. And the first thing they did when they got the boys to the school was cut their hair. In many of the First Nations culture, you don't cut your hair unless somebody in your family dies. Then you cut your hair and you burn it as an offering to let that person know you will never forget them. So here you have these little boys all gathered together, not permitted to speak their language, but the first thought for all of them is, which one of my parents is dead, my mother or my father? These schools were not conducive to learning anything. The whole point of the school was to remove your cultural heritage. And often when the first schools were first introduced and people spoke to the children, or sorry, the parents, they sold this as we're going to teach your children how to live in the new system, in the new environment. They're going to learn to read and write and do math and all of these different things. And what they actually did in many instances, especially when funding began to start to fall away, they used children as a cheap source of labor. So you think you're going to school to learn how to read and write, and what you're actually doing is going to work in the local farms about how to turn over the soil, how to plant, how to harvest. Many of the parents actually dressed their children in their best regalia to impress the people that were taking them into the schools. That regalia was in most instances taken and sold or burned, and the children were issued uniforms and a number. So this has come out in our Truth and Reconciliation situation fairly recently. In 1876, the Indian Act is introduced, and women who marry non-Indigenous men lose their status as First Nations people. This would not be restored until 1980. And Indigenous women are not permitted to vote in federal elections until 1960. So imagine everything that's going on around you and you have no say in the people in leadership. So based on our history, based on our values, our worldview, how do we begin to incorporate Indigenous wisdom and values in our daily practice? Well, first of all, acknowledge the benefits of Indigenous wisdom. Make a concerted effort to move away from judgment. That's probably the biggest thing that serves as a barrier, is these preconceived ideas about First Nations people. Consider the teachings that have served Indigenous peoples as they struggle to address the multitude of challenges inflicted through colonization. Perhaps the biggest testimony to all of the things that we have endured is that we are still here. We are still celebrating our culture. Even when it was outlawed, it went underground, so it still exists today. So we can name our children the way we did 200 years ago. So that in itself speaks to the strength of our people, that we are still here and we are still advocating on behalf of each other. Be aware of and avoid the conditions of indifference that has trickled down through the ages and only serves as a barrier to developing and maintaining healthy relationships. Be a willing participant in and/or witness of ceremonies of gratitude when they are offered through public events. Whether this is done through open prayer or through personal reflection, gratitude for the many gifts that surround us is paramount to our self-care and collective wellness. So I just want to identify some of the values. Identify and define a set of values that you consider to be important and represent your ethical ideals. So I like to call these the 4 A's. And I chose them because they reflect some of the ethical ideas of Indigenous peoples and organizations. So again, these aren't specific to First Nations, they're universal values, but they seem to directly relate to our worldview. So number 1, the first A is acceptance, favorable reception or belief in something. Altruism, unselfish concerns for the welfare of others, appreciation, recognizing the quality or significance of people and things, authenticity, the quality or condition of being trustworthy or genuine. If you're doing anything in your life that comes into working with First Nations people, those 4 A's will go a long way towards building a working relationship with Indigenous people. Other values might be more specific. For example, accountability, obligation or willingness to accept responsibility, benevolence, an inclination to perform acts of kindness or charity, commitment, being bound emotionally or intellectually to a course of action, and dedication, selfless devotion of energy and time. Again, that comes down to that word volunteer that doesn't exist in our culture. Shared values. These are universal but generally practiced by all Indigenous peoples. Respect, honor, integrity, wisdom, balance, sharing, spirituality, and generosity. In summary, what has been presented today implies a connectedness and inclusive approach to daily challenges. Perhaps the most important message is that we are not alone. We are not alone. We have people fulfilling specific roles in our communities that provide guidance and support. We have ancient wisdom and values that serve to unite us in times of crisis. This is a prime example of what we're experiencing right now, being able to share with our elders, and even through technology like what we're applying today, is critical to keeping people connected. We believe that learning is a lifelong process and that we need to always think and speak with our minds and our hearts. Engage both, not one or the other. As we move forward to address and stand up against violence towards women and children, we invite all community members to consider the time-honored wisdom of our ancestors and how we can work collectively with respect, patience, and understanding to address this all too prevalent issue. Okay. Are there any questions about what's been presented today?
Leslie, there has been a couple questions in the chat. I'm just gonna read some out to you, okay? Let me just, sorry, I wrote them down up here. What kind of visitor protocols could be displayed?
Could be displayed. Well, I work with the Capital Regional District, and we have several nature houses nature centers within the regional parks. And we have recently installed an acknowledgement of the territory. As you enter the building, the nature house at Francis King Regional Park, there's a beautiful banner right there that says whose land we're on. And it's always important to acknowledge that. So we have really begun to sincerely present that type of information as a adherence to protocol for the local territory.
And Leslie, I don't have any other questions yet, but I'm sure some will come into the chat. But just so you know, there has been a lot of comments of people who are really moved by it and brought to tears from some of it. And want to make sure that they get a copy. So I just want everyone to know that we will be posting the recording as well. And yeah, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and I'll make sure Leslie hears them. Hi, could Leslie speak to how Western religion affects the Western worldview?
Western religion affects the Western worldview? Well, it's a big part of our legal system. It's a big part of our governance. And there's not to say that it's a bad thing. I don't want to imply that people's religious beliefs are somehow interfering. When I was a child, my grandfather, I was really curious about religion, and I asked my grandfather, and he was thinking, how do I explain religion to, an 8-year-old? So what he said was, imagine that there is a wagon wheel on its side, and with all the different spokes. And in the hub of the wagon wheel, there's a crust of bread. And on each of the spokes, there's a different creature. There's an inchworm here and a ladybug here. And he went around the spokes and, talked about the different animals. But they all need that crust of bread. They're going to get there at different times. They're going to get there different ways, but it's an important part of a need they have. And so different people have different beliefs. I believe that Canada is a big enough country for us to celebrate all of those different things, like Christmas, like the Chinese New Year. We just want to be a part of that, and our celebrations being respected as such. Our potlatch ban happened from 1884 to 1951, and yet we still continue to practice in secret. And ours is not the first cultural portion of our spirituality, to be ignored or somehow pushed aside.
Okay, Leslie, I have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm just going to rally the next one off. What were the 4 A's again?
Okay, the 4 A's are, here we go, acceptance, altruism, appreciation, and authenticity.
Thank you. And how can people use sage and sweetgrass in the way that you described, particularly as a non-Indigenous person and ally?
It is always a good idea to go through that process with a knowledgeable person, somebody who does that cultural practice on a regular basis, rather than try to do it on your own. In order to really feel the process, it's really important to have somebody with you that talks you through it, walks you through it. It's also important, in that sort of cleansing, to identify, are you a child of water? Are you a child of fire? Are you, do you feel when you're stressed out, if you go next to moving water like a stream or hearing the tide come in, the water along the shore, is that something that drops your shoulders 6 inches? And it does for me. I'm a child of water. And I know that when I'm standing or sitting next to a stream flowing, that sound somehow resonates with me and helps ground me. Some people get that from walking through a forest and connecting there. It's an actual medical fact that First Nations people, or people in general, that walk through the forest, the wilderness, there's energy coming from the surrounding trees and everything that can really influence your well-being. So being aware of that, and then maybe adding in smudging with sweetgrass or sage or both, just really helps that settle into place. So it's always a good idea to connect. Always never be afraid to ask people for help in that particular regard.
Okay. Sorry. And so, okay, the next one is there a place to find a list of the 7 sacred teachings so people can learn more?
Yes, they're available in many different books. I'm sure if you Googled it, you would find the 7 sacred teachings. I believe the Code of Ethics is also available online. If you just typed it in, it would show you where those things are posted in books or even handouts and things like that.
Okay, and how does a person become an elder within their community?
Well, there's a difference between senior citizens and elders. Elders have a special skill to be able to teach. Knowing something and being able to share it are 2 completely different skill sets. So elders are those who are very knowledgeable and able to share that information, and often being able to share it with different age groups. They're not just talking to other people, they're often sharing with children. So they are often storytellers. They are often involved in ceremony, advising capacities or consultation capacities. Those are elders. There are also senior citizens in a village who have specific knowledge about fishing methods or hunting methods or gathering medicine. That's a different skill set. And they often mentor somebody who's wanting to learn those different skills. So it's about being really well versed and being able to share that information that makes you an elder.
Okay, Leslie, the next one. Where can I find more information on Indigenous government prior to contact, particularly told by Indigenous people and Indigenous perspectives?
There are several books that are out there written by different people. It depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for something academic, there's all kinds of textbooks that are available. But if you're looking for something that's a little more personal, to get sort of an idea about pre-contact, anything written by the late Richard Wagamese is worth a read, and somebody else who's definitely worth reading and who I deeply admire and respect is Monique Gray Smith. She has written some beautiful, beautiful books that really reach out. And if you go through the Indigenous Studies programs at the University of Victoria or Camosun College, they will have a reading list that'll help identify some of that for you.
And Leslie, this one's been asked a few times in a couple different ways, but how can non-Indigenous settlers uphold and honor Indigenous ways of knowing and being in a respectful way that does not tokenize or appropriate this knowledge and wisdom?
Well, I think we are all well aware of when we are doing a tokenish kind of thing. I've been invited to serve on different boards and different community councils and stuff, and I can almost sense it immediately that I am there because they want to be able to say we have First Nations representation on our board or our council. And you get this feeling like when you put something forward that you get people turning from their shoulder going, oh, is that right? Is that the way to do it? Really? Okay. Anyways, and they move forward. That's tokenism, that what you say is not really valued. So if you're going to invite First Nations people to be a part of your process, you need to know that they are carrying a very valuable knowledge with them that could be very beneficial to your organization. And always consider what your organization's mandate is, and is there room there to introduce First Nations practices into your company or your organization's mandate. It's First Nations people have, a lot of the people I know have been in the same circumstance where they've been serving on a board and had to step away because they just knew that what they were sharing wasn't going to be treated as relevant for whatever topic was on the table at the time. So I think you have to be aware of that. I think you also need to develop a sense of, you have to develop a sense of trust with people if you're going to invite them to be on your board or your table, and sincerity has to be a part of that as well.
And Leslie, this one is from the teachers. I'm also a teacher, so I love this question. But how can teachers integrate Indigenous wisdom into our classrooms on a daily basis?
There are lots of books available that have been designed to help teachers through this process. As I know, it's fairly recently that we've actually made Indigenous culture a part of the curriculum. But also, I know this isn't something maybe we can do right now, or we would have to do it as we're doing it today, but inviting people to speak to your class. It's always better to have First Nations people speaking about First Nations culture, First Nations stories, especially stories. I've witnessed several times where a First Nations story from my territory has been slightly adjusted so somebody who's not First Nations can tell that story, and that should never be done. That is a real a breach of cultural protocol. If you want to share a story with children, and unless it's been written by a First Nations person and it's in a book, the oral presentation should be done by a person from that territory, because those stories are something that explains our history, our connection to the land or the animals and or the whole environment. And so they are sacred to us, and we should be the ones to share that with young people. So inviting people to come into your classroom using this sort of technology is unfortunately the way of our future right now, but it's really important to always acknowledge that. And with lots of textbooks, you can share the general information about First Nations people. That's, hunting practices and things. A lot of that is provided, but the experiences connected to that should come from First Nations people.
And Leslie, we often engage in painful conversations and experiences in our office. What is a way that we can make the space more soothing?
Um, One of the things that I've done is I did some, I researched for specifically for the month of June, which is Aboriginal History Month. And each day in the office, I posted a positive fact about First Nations history. Despite this, we were able to accomplish this. Despite that, we were able to accomplish this. So people started to gain a deeper appreciation for First Nations people just based on that little posting in the staff room or that posting at the entranceway to your office or whatever like that. Those messages go a long way towards people. I had no idea. Many people don't know that the alcohol that was introduced was 150 proof. I mean, we can barely tolerate that today, let alone 200 years ago. So the posting that information it starts to gently break down those stereotypes. It also is a gentle way of introducing some of those really important and key things that First Nations people practice on a daily basis or is a big part of their lives.
And Leslie, just quick, what animal is linked to love in the seven sacred teachings?
Eagle. Eagles mate for life. Yeah. There's a pair of them that nest next to my mom and dad's house up in the village, and my mom and dad call them Eddie and Edith. And they're absolutely beautiful creatures. And one of the things that is so gracious about eagles is that, and I have witnessed this, I fish with my dad every summer. I go fishing with my dad. And this one time he said, watch this, as I happened to catch a little bottom feeder. And he whistled on the eagles that always follow him every time he's fishing. And he tossed the fish into the air, and the eagle came by and scooped it right next to the boat and then flew away, but said thank you to my dad. He whistled back a big thank you. And I just thought, that's amazing. And then when there were fishing traps in the streams, while they were cleaning the fish there and whatever they were not going to use was flowing downstream, the eagles who were patiently perched in the trees lining the stream swooped down and gathered up that stuff. But before they went back to their perches, they whistled back a thank you. So there's this beautiful connection to those animals. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons why they represent love.
Sorry, there's a lot of questions. I'm just trying to get through them in an order. A lot of people are asking if you have any resources or specific books to share, specifically about understanding Indigenous worldviews in Canada.
I do have a lot of books. I have not the library that's right next to me here, but just one outside my office here. There's a big library of books that I would recommend, and I can put together a big recommended reading list and have it sent out to everybody if you like. Would that?
I think that would be amazing because
I will do that.
Definitely. Okay, let me just go back up to my list here. I really liked the definition of what children are, sacred and precious little people. Can you give us an example of how children are treated according to this definition in contrast to Western culture?
Well, children are, it's very important that children understand how special their role is in the community. So, for example, a child in our village would not receive a name until they're old enough to realize that they are part of a community. So when they're little, they're just, little girl, little boy. But when they demonstrate without any influence from grandparents or parents, and they share something from their plate, or they bring an elder a glass of water or something like that, they are realizing that they are part of a larger community. And that's when they are considered human. So they get their first name, and that first name is often a nickname. The next name they get is when they are making the transition from being a child to a young adult. And this name is meant to acknowledge this particular part of their journey in life. And there are usually rites of passage that take place to honor this person. The next name you get is when you get married, because quite often the groom's family will give the bride a new name and the bride's family gives the groom a new name. And that represents the coming together of those two families. And the last name you receive is when you become a grandparent. Your role in the community changes. You are no longer a provider, you are now a teacher. Even if you're only teaching your own children and not sort of the children of the community, but you're teaching your own children, your role has changed, and that change should be acknowledged. So your names in your life acknowledge those very important parts of your journey in life. And so you were always at one point or another in your life held up to your community. And that's really important for children to witness, that they are the most important people in our village. And that's one of the ways that we do that.
And Leslie, where would somebody find someone to help them with smudging?
Well, if we're talking about across the country, I would say maybe approach your local friendship center. The First Nations Friendship Centers across Canada are like an embassy of First Nations people. And they will have people who have specific expertise who work with their staff and their clients. That's probably the best bet, because the friendship centers serve the urban Aboriginal people most of the time. So they will be in some of the friendship centers are in major cities or major towns. So I would suggest approaching a friendship center. Or even approaching a local band office. If you do approach a band office though, and you're asking for that kind of specific information, bring a gift with you. It's always important to gift people before they share knowledge with you, and the gift should not represent who you think they are. So you don't want to bring tobacco or bannock or anything else like that. You want to bring something that represents who you are. So maybe bake a loaf of banana bread, or maybe you have a particular craft that represents who you are. Bring something that represents who you are and that you are requesting some assistance and some knowledge. It's also a good idea to do your homework and maybe learn the greeting in that language from the territory, the village that you're visiting. When you've done your homework, it represents your sincerity, that you really want to know what this is about. You really want to know how to go about this in a culturally appropriate way. So those kinds of steps always go a long way with First Nations people. I know they do in my village.
Amazing. And somebody said, great presentation. Loved the suggestion of the practice of starting and ending your day with giving thanks to the Creator. Are there any other daily practices that you could recommend?
Be aware of those things that that are challenging to you, and what you do to move beyond those challenges. Sometimes when I have to speak to a large audience, and this is kind of odd for me because I didn't have to be in front of 200 people, at least I can't see you in front of me. But when I do a presentation, I step outside my house. I have a big cedar tree, and I put my hands on the tree and I say, help me to reach the people I need to reach, to say the things I need to say, be with me. Our ancestors, when our people pass away, they don't leave us. They're always in front of us, guiding us, behind us, supporting us. And all we have to do is call on them. This is part of our belief, is that when people pass away, it's a transformation. It is not the end of something. So whenever I've had to do something like this, I ask my grandparents to be with me. Please support and guide me, help me say the things in the correct way to reach the people I need to reach. And I've always felt that presence there, and it helps you move forward in a good way. So I hope that maybe answers your question.
Amazing. And it sort of leads us into the next question of, how do you make your message resonate and get through to people?
People will choose to want to know more. You can, play a drum, you can sing, you can do all of these things. Some people will connect almost immediately, and some people won't. And that's the reality of our lives. There we have so many different people that come from so many different diverse backgrounds. All you can really do is put your best foot forward, extend that hand of friendship, and hope that that person is open to learning those things. I once did a presentation for an ESL group, and one of the people had obviously read some misinformation and said, how come you get free this and free cars and free houses and free education and free medical, all these different things? And I said, wow, that sounds great. Where do I sign up? Because that's not the reality. Unless you live and work and breathe on reserves, you're not entitled to those same rights. But that's the misinformation that's out there. So this person already had sort of a biased attitude when they came into the workshop. And gradually, just by acknowledging that person and then sharing some information, that person came up to me later and said, I wasn't aware, I was told this, or I read this somewhere, and breaking down that misinformation in a gentle way, never be in somebody's face going, you know, you got it wrong, or your people did this to us. That's not the way that our ancestors would have taught us how to approach people. They would have done it always gently offering a hand of friendship.
And Leslie, knowing that we still exist in a colonial society and system, can you speak to a two-eyed seeing approach that aims to weave Indigenous knowledge systems with Western ones?
Well, again, I recommend that gentle approach. And when you present that, the way, I mean, the way we did things here for First Nations people across this country, people are just now starting to appreciate the beauty of our connection. We see life in the stones on the beach, the trees, the animals, the plants, everything around us. That sense of connection is the first step towards possibly taking some of that and making it part of your daily practice or part of your organization. Some people need to be convinced, and they don't initially see it, but when they see how people are much more in tune and much more focused, then that kind of gets contagious. One of the things about our culture as well is this sense of time. We like to think in Western society that we can control time. We all walk around with day timers, and we write in our meetings, and we write in these different things we're supposed to be doing and everything. But for the First Nations people, things happen as they're supposed to happen, not necessarily the way we want them to happen. And because we think that way, we don't make room for the what ifs. For example, we had somebody once upon a time who was a single mom who was repeatedly late coming to work. And rather than say, you are late every day, and there was an approach, there's something we can do to help you with being able to be here with everybody else. What we found out was that this young mom was having trouble with her child going to daycare, and the child was reluctant. And the mother was in such a hurry, she didn't take the time to understand what was bothering that child. It ended up that the person who was looking after this child was a bully, who was not treating this child well, who was also very racist with this particular child. And what we had to kind of really push to find this information out. And if you don't take the time to understand what is bothering that child and get down to that child's level and have a conversation with them, you now have eventually a teenager who doesn't tell you anything because they don't think you value what they have to say. But when they're taught from a very young age to what they have to say is valid and is important, you get somebody who is not afraid to share with you when they're concerned or when they feel somehow vulnerable. With my three sons, I was always, if there's anything that you need to tell me, don't think I'm going to judge you. Don't think I'm going to immediately go to punishment or anything like that. Let me help you rather than point out what you're doing wrong. And so this is how we sort of bring this understanding together, is being open to a different approach. You're always going to run against people who aren't open. And from my lens, it's a sad thing because they're not leaving any room for something potentially moving forward in a better way.
And Leslie, just so you know, there are a ton of comments of how amazing this has been, and we don't have time for me to read them all, but I will make sure that you receive all of those comments written down. But just know that so many people are grateful and can't wait to share all of their learnings.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I feel like I'm just kind of hammering you with questions, but just trying to answer them. Can you explain more about the turtle and its symbolism of truth?
Well, the turtle is solid. It has that shell. It's the animal that dove down into the mud and repeatedly brought up soil from the bottom of the water to support a sky dweller that came down and landed in this area. The other animals couldn't hold their breath long enough, but the turtle was very deliberate in their approach. And so this is why the turtle is a big part of that belief is because of this, the consistency, the strength, and following through. Just want to get to that page so I don't miss anything that might be in that page. Right now, I know that I feel very sorry for turtles right now, because through their mating season, the temperature has to be a certain way. And when that temperature is too high, you end up with more females than males, which jeopardizes the continuation of the species. That happens for sea turtles and land turtles. And that's what they're experiencing now with global warming. So it's really sad that that particular species is experiencing that. And because they are so very important to us. Just looking for that one thing. Where did I put it? There is a, from the Eastern cultures, there is a, there we go, okay. There is a belief that we are on Turtle Island, and it's the truth of the turtle that made this territory, and that's why it's always connected, or made this land, which is why it's always connected to truth. If you go into these seven sacred teachings, there's a lot more in-depth description. For our time today, I jotted down a couple of things that came into this particular project, but there is a lot more in depth in those seven sacred teachings, especially if it's your intention to follow through with them.
And so Leslie, this is another teacher, so as a high school teacher, they're struggling to help colleagues incorporate ways of knowing when they don't think that they have the ability or opportunity to incorporate history or cultural elements. I guess like specifically in classes that might not normally cover that, like a math class. And, you know, I totally understand that being a teacher. And yeah, I guess, is there any way, yeah, I guess, do you have any examples of how that can be incorporated into different classes?
Specifically around math?
I think math was just an example, but I think more like the classes that maybe don't cover it specifically. Like, what are some little things that maybe could happen throughout the day? But I don't know, I'm kind of making that up. Your question might be completely different.
Okay, so let me see. Well, one of the things that we did in a classroom was we broke the classroom. This is a language arts class. We broke the classroom into 4 clans. And those 4 clans had to come up with a hero, a person. They had to write about why they are the Bear Clan. What happened that made you the Bear Clan? And what, to be a member of the Bear Clan, what do you need to have in place? What kind of leadership would you have? What kind of, so each of the 5 groups created their own. We decided to be the Beaver Clan, or the Eagle Clan, or Wolf Clan, and they developed their own story of creation. And it was, they enjoyed it because they were not required to do a writing assignment on their own. It was something they could do in a team approach, almost like a community approach. And they had lots of fun with it. I said, there's no holds barred. You can write whatever you want, but it's your story of your history, of your cultural practices. What do you do to acknowledge your clan animal for sharing its information with you, and or whatever the connection is. So we went through this step by step through the groups, and the students themselves, they loved it because it was not having to come up with these concepts individually, but come up with them in that team or community sense. So that's one of the things that we did. The other thing we did is we had a group plan a potlatch. And you need to make sure that you're going to acknowledge your singers, and your drummers. You're going to have to acknowledge the elders that are there. You're going to have to pay witnesses to remember this event, because we can't write it down. It's something they have to remember. You're going to have to gift your audience with things. So what do you think that this event, based on our economy today, is going to cost you? Plan your potlatch according to what today's financial situation is like. So you're going to have to purchase materials to make regalia. You're going to have to pay your carvers to make the masks and things that are going to be used for ceremony. All of these different things, we put together a list of things that would be required, and then we let them run with that. So they had to calculate what their potlatch was going to cost their family or their clan.
And Leslie, we are at 12 o'clock, but what I'll do, if it's okay with you, is if anybody has any other questions, you can put them in the chat now, and I'll have access to the chat after the workshop, or email them to me at wpoll@moosehide-campaign.ca, and I will make sure that they get to Leslie, as well as all of your incredible messages of like just love and gratitude for this, for this workshop. And I've really, really enjoyed it. But sorry, there's just so many more coming in the chat, and I'm like, I really want to, but just being definitely respectful of your time, Leslie. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to issue? And is it okay with you if I collect all the questions and get them to you afterwards?
Absolutely. I usually do a full day session at the Royal Roads University. And so having to kind of squeeze this all into a smaller space is kind of a challenge. But in closing, I would just like to say that with this pandemic that's happening right now, we've had to call upon skills that maybe we didn't even know we had in order to maintain communication and to share information, all of those different things. So there's a potential for us to move forward in a good way with that. And this campaign, the Moosehide campaign, has always been near and dear to my heart. I think the founders are amazing. I think it resonates with so many people on so many levels, and it's a wonderful tribute to women and children, and an opportunity to maybe consider ways of moving forward. So it's all of those things, and I can't express my gratitude more than that, to be able to say what a privilege it is to be able to speak to the community at large regarding this issue and how we can collaboratively move forward in a good way and put our best foot forward.
Amazing. Thank you, Leslie. A huge thank you for all of this. I absolutely loved learning from you today, and we're all truly grateful that you were able to join us and gift us with this workshop and this knowledge. I'd also like to thank all of our participants for joining us in this workshop and in this space, and dedicating yourselves to our Moosehide campaign cause. We're truly appreciative.